The first time I saw another woman's name on the grave beside my wife, I assumed the cemetery had made a mistake. Then the director showed me my daughter's signature. My name is Samuel Warren. I was 79 years old that October, and for 24 years I had owned a small rectangle of grass at Cedar Grove Memorial Park. Plot 215. My wife Elaine was buried in Plot 214. We bought them together when we were 55. Back then, buying cemetery plots had felt less like preparing for death and more like completing paperwork for a future so distant it barely belonged to us. Elaine had complained about the price. I had complained about the location. She wanted the maple trees. I wanted somewhere closer to the parking lot. We compromised, as married people often do, by choosing exactly what Elaine wanted and allowing me to complain about it for the next 24 years. Elaine died 6 years before this story began. She was 73. We had been married 52 years. I visited Cedar Grove on the first Saturday of every month. Not because I believed Elaine knew whether I came. That is important. I knew where she was and where she wasn't. But marriage is 50 years of conversation, and after one person dies, the habit of continuing it does not disappear simply because only one voice remains audible. So on the first Saturday of October, I drove through the iron gates carrying a thermos of coffee and a bundle of yellow chrysanthemums. Elaine hated chrysanthemums. I bought them every autumn anyway because they survived cold weather and marriage had already taught me that practicality occasionally outranks preference. I parked beneath the maple trees, walked toward Section C, and saw a small temporary marker planted in the grass beside Elaine. At first I thought someone had placed it in the wrong plot. Cemeteries are orderly places, but people remain people even after they start numbering the ground. I walked closer. The marker belonged in Plot 215. My plot. There was a name on it. Marjorie Sloan. I stared at those two words for perhaps 30 seconds. Then I looked at Elaine Stone. Then back at the marker. Then at Elaine again, as though my wife might explain why a woman named Marjorie was apparently moving into my side of the neighborhood. Absolutely not, I said. A groundskeeper about 20 yards away looked toward me. I pointed at the marker. Is this temporary? He looked uncomfortable. All those markers are temporary, sir. That is not what I asked. 10 minutes later I was inside the cemetery office. The director was a woman named Priya Patel, probably in her late 40s, wearing glasses and the patient expression of someone whose profession requires conversations nobody wants to have. She asked me to sit. I remained standing. I have always believed standing makes a complaint approximately 12% more effective. My wife is in 214. Yes, Mr. Warren. I own 215. Ms. Patel paused. That pause was the first warning. You own 215. There are sentences that immediately divide your life into before and after. That was one of them. What does that mean? The interment right was surrendered to Cedar Grove in July and subsequently purchased by another family. No, it wasn't. I have the paperwork. Then the paperwork is wrong. She opened a folder on her computer. I leaned toward the desk. Who surrendered it? Ms. Patel looked at me before answering. Your authorized representative. Who? Elizabeth Harper. Beth. My daughter. I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Sometimes a laugh is simply the sound the body makes when anger arrives too fast for language. My daughter sold my cemetery plot? Ms. Patel chose her words carefully. She surrendered the interment right under the financial power of attorney we have on file. Cedar Grove repurchased it according to the contract, and it was later sold to Mrs. Sloan. Show me. She did. I recognized Beth's signature immediately. Elizabeth Warren Harper. My daughter had signed away the place where I had expected to be buried beside my wife for almost a quarter of a century. And she had never said a word. Beth was 55 years old. She taught high school history for 31 years and had inherited nearly every organizational habit Elaine possessed. calendars, folders, labels, emergency contact lists. Beth could plan a family picnic with the administrative precision of a military operation. Elaine loved that about her. I occasionally found it exhausting. After Elaine died, Beth began helping me with paperwork. At first it was sensible. Insurance forms, property tax notices, online accounts Elaine had always managed. 6 months earlier, when I had cataract surgery, Beth suggested I sign a financial power of attorney so she could handle bills if I needed her. I signed it. I trusted her. That does not mean I gave her permission to reorganize my eternity. I left the cemetery without putting the flowers on Elaine's grave. I forgot them on Ms. Patel's desk. She later told me one of the groundskeepers placed them there for me. I appreciated that. At the time, I was too angry to appreciate anything. Beth lived 20 minutes from my house with her husband Richard. I drove there directly. She opened the door wearing old jeans and holding a paintbrush. There was blue paint on her cheek. "Dad? You sold my grave." Beth closed her eyes. That made me angrier than surprise would have. She knew exactly what I meant. "Can you come inside?" "No. Dad. I am perfectly capable of being furious on a porch." Richard appeared behind her, saw my face and made the excellent decision to disappear. I had always liked Richard. That afternoon, I liked him more. Beth put the brush down. "I was going to tell you." "When?" "I don't know. Before or after somebody put Marjorie Sloan there?" Her expression changed. "You saw the marker?" "Yes, Beth. It is difficult to miss another person's name where mine was supposed to go." She rubbed her forehead. "Please let me explain." "Excellent. Explain." Beth had purchased another plot. That was her explanation. Not at Cedar Grove. At Meadow Lawn Memorial, 12 minutes from her house. She had reserved a plot for me near the section where she and Richard intended eventually to make their own arrangements. For a moment, I genuinely could not speak. "So you moved me." "No one moved you. Apparently death has become a change of address form." "Dad, stop." "No. You stop." She tried to explain the drive to Cedar Grove. 45 minutes from her home on a good day. Longer with winter traffic. The older section had uneven paths and limited parking. Meadow Lawn was newer, closer to the family and easier to reach. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Your mother is at Cedar Grove." Beth looked at me. "I know where Mom is." "Apparently not." That hurt her. I saw it. I continued anyway. "We bought those plots together." "I know. We made that decision together." "I know. Then what gave you the right to undo it?" Beth became quiet. Finally she said, "The document you signed." It was the wrong answer. "The document gave you authority." I pointed toward her. "It did not give you ownership." That was when Richard came back. He stood several feet behind Beth and said softly, "She's wrong about that part, Sam." Beth turned. "Richard. You should have asked him." Richard was either a brave man or had forgotten he had to live in that house after I left. Beth folded her arms. "I know I should have asked. Then why didn't you?" She looked at me for a long time. "Because every time we discuss anything about getting older, you turn it into a trial." There it was. The first piece of truth I had not expected. "What does that mean?" "It means I ask whether you want someone to clean the gutters and you tell me you've owned a ladder since 1974. I have. I ask whether I can put your bills on automatic payment and you tell me you have written checks for 60 years. I have. I ask what you want us to do if you ever can't make decisions for yourself and you say you'll let us know when you're dead." That was a joke. It stops being funny when I'm the person who will actually have to make those decisions. The porch went quiet. Beth took a breath. I should have asked. I didn't. That was wrong. But you handed me responsibility for everything you don't want to think about, then get angry when I make a decision. I wish I could tell you I considered that fairly. I did not. I said, give me the power of attorney. Beth's face changed. Dad? I'm revoking it. Fine. Fine. We said fine the way families say words that mean almost the opposite. I drove home. At 7:14 that evening my son Thomas called. Tom was 51 and lived in Colorado. He had spent 27 years working for the same electrical supply company and possessed an extraordinary ability to remain calm during arguments he was not physically present for. Beth called me. Of course she did. She said you found out. That is usually what happens when you sell a man's cemetery plot and someone else's name appears on it. Tom sighed. I told her not to do it. I sat straighter. You knew? Silence. Tom's famous calm suddenly became less impressive. How long? June. 4 months. You knew 4 months ago? She asked what I thought. And? I said she was insane if she did it without talking to you. And then? She did it without talking to you. Why didn't you tell me? Another silence. I thought she would. That is not an answer. Tom's voice became quieter. No. I didn't tell you because then I would be involved. At least he was honest. You were already involved. I know that now. I asked Tom whether he agreed with Beth. About selling it? No. About moving me? Dad, nobody is moving you. You both keep saying that. Because you're not dead. Tom paused. Then he said something I did not expect. Can I ask you something? No. I'm going to anyway. He asked why being buried beside Elaine mattered so much. I almost hung up. Because she was my wife. I know. For 52 years. I know. We bought the plots together. I know. Then why ask? Tom said. Because you keep explaining the history, not the reason. I did hang up then. Not dramatically. I told him I was finished talking and pressed the button. I have standards. But the question remained. Why did it matter? The easy answer was Elaine. The difficult answer took longer. 2 days later I returned to Cedar Grove. This time the yellow chrysanthemums were already on Elaine's grave. The groundskeeper had arranged them in the small metal vase. They looked good. Elaine would have hated that I thought so. I went to the office. Ms. Patel recognized me immediately. Cemetery directors probably remember the men who accused them of misplacing their future graves. I want the plot back. I assumed you might. What needs to happen? The answer was complicated. The transfer paperwork was complete. Beth's authority had been valid when she signed it. Cedar Grove had repurchased plot 215. The Sloan family had then purchased it in good faith. Can I buy it back from them? If Mrs. Sloan agrees. How much did she pay? I can't discuss her account. Can you contact her? Ms. Patel hesitated. I can ask whether she's willing to speak with you. Good. Then I remembered something. What happened to my money? The cemetery had refunded $6,800 when Beth surrendered the plot. I had never seen it. For approximately 4 seconds, my anger became something uglier. Where did the refund go? The account listed on the authorization. Which account? Ms. Patel showed me the final 4 digits. I recognized them. The money had gone into my savings account. Beth had not taken $1. I wish I could say I had never suspected she might. For those 4 seconds, I had. That embarrassed me more than almost anything that had happened. That afternoon my granddaughter Molly came to visit. Molly was 27, Beth's oldest child, and worked as an elementary school counselor. She had inherited Elaine's brown eyes and my unfortunate tendency to ask questions people would prefer not to answer. She brought soup. I told her I was not sick. She said soup did not require illness. I told her that sounded suspiciously modern. We ate at my kitchen table. She waited until I had finished half the bowl before saying, "Mom told me what happened." Does anyone in this family still have private information? No. Good to know. Molly put her spoon down. She's really upset. She should be. She knows she was wrong. She was. Grandpa. There is a particular tone women in my family use when my name becomes a warning. Elaine perfected it. Beth inherited it. Apparently Molly had now completed training. What? You're allowed to be angry. How generous. But you're acting like Mom woke up one morning and decided to steal your grave for entertainment. I stared at her. She did steal my grave. You're doing it again. Doing what? Making the sentence so dramatic nobody can disagree with you. I disliked that sentence. Mostly because I understood it immediately. Molly continued. Do you know how much Mom does for you? I didn't ask her to. Some of it you did. She began listing things. Beth had spent 11 hours on the phone after my homeowner's insurance mistakenly canceled a policy. She handled my Medicare paperwork every autumn. She had found the contractor when my basement pipe leaked. She drove 40 miles to bring me my passport when I left it at home before a family trip. She kept copies of every emergency contact. She remembered the dates of my appointments because I regularly asked her what time they were. I am not incompetent. I didn't say you were? Then what is your point? My point is Mom has slowly become the person responsible for every detail nobody else notices. I looked at the soup. Molly continued more softly. Grandma used to do those things. That silenced me. Elaine did. For 52 years, forms simply appeared where I needed to sign them. Birthdays were remembered. The tax folder contained tax documents. The refrigerator filter got replaced before the water tasted strange. Insurance cards appeared in the glove compartment. I knew Elaine did those things. I thanked her for many of them. But knowing labor exists is not the same as understanding its weight. After Elaine died, some of that invisible work had quietly moved to Beth. And because it remained invisible, I had never noticed the transfer. Molly said. She should have asked you. Yes. She had no right to sell it without asking. Yes. But she wasn't trying to erase Grandma. Then what was she trying to do? Molly looked at me. She was trying to solve a problem you never asked her to solve. That description sounded uncomfortably familiar. Elaine used to accuse me of exactly the same thing. Friday morning Ms. Patel called. Mrs. Sloan was willing to meet me. I expected Marjorie Sloan to be younger. I don't know why. Perhaps anger prefers its opponents healthy enough to defeat easily. Marjorie was 77. She was small, silver-haired and wore a purple coat despite the day being far too warm for it. She met me in the cemetery office Monday morning. Ms. Patel made introductions. Marjorie looked at me and said, "So you're Elaine's husband?" That startled me. You know my wife? No. I know her stone. Then she said, "My Frank is on the other side." We walked to Section C. Elaine was in 214. My former plot was 215. Frank Sloan was in 216. Marjorie stood between the two headstones and pointed. I bought 215 because it's beside my husband. For the first time since seeing her name, I understood the geometry. The plot I wanted because it was beside Elaine was the same plot Marjorie wanted because it was beside Frank. I had arrived prepared to meet the woman occupying my place. Instead I met someone trying to keep hers. Frank had died 4 years earlier. He had been a postal carrier for 38 years. Marjorie said he could remember every address on a route he had not worked since 1986 but regularly forgot where he left his reading glasses. Elaine could remember birthdays for people she hadn't seen in 20 years, I said, and once spent 40 minutes looking for a pair of sunglasses that were on her head. Marjorie smiled. Sounds familiar. For a few minutes, we stopped being opponents. Then I remembered why I was there. I want to buy the plot back. Marjorie's smile disappeared. I know. I'll pay what you paid. No. I'll pay more. No. I was not accustomed to negotiations ending this quickly. How much more? It isn't about money. Of course it wasn't. That was exactly what I would have said. Marjorie looked at Frank's headstone. My children live in 3 states. I've moved twice since Frank died. Everything changed. This is one thing I already decided. So had I. I know. We stood there quietly. Then Marjorie asked, "Did your wife care which side you were on?" I almost laughed. She cared which side of the bed I was on. Frank too. Apparently marriage creates territorial habits. Marjorie smiled. Then she became serious again. I am sorry your daughter did this. But I bought the plot honestly. I don't want to spend whatever years I have left wondering whether somebody is waiting for me to give it back. There was nothing I could say to that. I went home angry at Beth. And, inconveniently, no longer angry at Marjorie. That made everything more difficult. I revoked Beth's financial power of attorney that week. She did not argue. She signed the acknowledgement, gave me copies of every file and transferred the account passwords into a folder. On the front she wrote, "Dad's accounts." Below it, in smaller handwriting, "Which Dad now manages because Dad has made his point." I laughed when I saw it. Then I realized it was the first time I had laughed about Beth in almost 2 weeks. Managing everything myself was satisfying. For approximately 9 days. On day 10 I discovered the water bill had migrated entirely online. On day 11 I spent 27 minutes attempting to reset a password for an account I did not remember creating. On day 12 the pharmacy texted me that a card had expired. On day 13 I found 3 renewal notices Elaine would have handled before I even knew they existed. I handled all of them. I was perfectly capable. I was also beginning to understand why Beth looked tired. That Sunday Tom called again. I answered. "How's self-government?" "Excellent. You sound angry." "I have 6 passwords for 4 utility companies." Tom laughed. Then he asked whether I had met Marjorie. Beth had told him. Of course. "She won't sell." "I'm sorry. I understand why." That surprised Tom. "Really? Don't sound so shocked. I've known you 51 years. You have only been conscious for about 48. Tom laughed. Then he returned to the question I had hung up on. "Do you know why it matters yet?" Yes. This time I did. After Elaine died, the world changed in ways people never mention in condolence cards. The obvious things are difficult. The empty chair. The silent bedroom. Cooking too much food. But the stranger changes are smaller. Nobody knows why you hate a particular restaurant. Nobody remembers the teacher your son disliked in 7th grade. Nobody remembers the vacation where the hotel room smelled like paint and Elaine spent 3 days claiming it did not bother her while mentioning it every 20 minutes. When your spouse dies after 52 years, you do not just lose a person. You lose the only other witness to most of your life. The cemetery plot had become evidence that one thing was still arranged the way Elaine and I arranged it together. House furniture changed. Cars changed. Children moved. Grandchildren grew. Elaine's side of the closet was eventually emptied. But 214 and 215 remained side by side. Until Beth changed it. I told Tom that. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I understand." "No, you don't. Probably not completely. But I understand more than I did." That was good enough. Then Tom said, "I think Beth needs to hear that. She should have thought of it before selling the plot." "Maybe. Definitely." "Dad?" "What? Do you want her to understand you, or do you want her to be punished for not understanding you?" I was beginning to dislike my children. They had become far too comfortable asking useful questions. 3 days later, I called Beth. She answered on the first ring. "Hi. Do you have dinner Thursday?" There was a pause. "Are you inviting me?" "No. I'm breaking into your house at 6. She laughed. Small sound. But I had missed it. Thursday night I went to Beth and Richard's house. Richard made roast chicken. He is an excellent cook and an irritatingly calm man. Molly came too. Nobody mentioned the cemetery until dessert. Then I put my fork down and said, "I met Marjorie." Beth's face tightened. "Okay. She won't sell it back. I'm sorry." "So am Madge." I told Beth about Frank. Plot 216. How Marjorie wanted exactly what I wanted. Then I explained why 215 mattered. I did not make a speech. Real families rarely speak in speeches. We interrupt. We repeat ourselves. We get distracted by whether the coffee is still warm. But eventually I told Beth the truth. The plot was one of the last decisions Elaine and I had made that no one had altered. Beth began crying. Quietly. She looked down at the table and said, "I didn't know." "I know." That sentence surprised her. "I thought you were going to say I should have known. You should have asked." "I know. But no. You could not know something I never told you." For the first time, the anger loosened. Then Beth told me why she had really done it. And it was not the reason I expected. 6 years earlier, the week after Elaine's funeral, Beth and I had gone to Cedar Grove to finalize the stone. I remembered the day. Cold. Windy. I remembered the salesman showing us fonts. I remembered hating every font because none looked like Elaine. What I did not remember was the drive home. Beth did. She said I had stared through the windshield for half an hour. Then, while we were stopped at a traffic light, I said, "Well, at least the next decision is already made." Beth had asked what I meant. I said, "I'm going right beside her." I remembered saying it after she reminded me. To me, it had been a fact. To Beth, who had just buried her mother, it sounded different. She had spent 6 years associating Plot 215 not with my marriage, but with the first day she understood there would eventually be another funeral she would have to arrange. "Every time you talked about that plot," she said, "I heard that car ride." I stared at my daughter. I wasn't trying to rush anything. I know. I wasn't thinking anything like that. I know that now. Beth wiped her eyes. "But when Meadow Lawn opened the new section near us, I thought maybe it would be better. Closer. Easier. And I wouldn't have to picture you already having a place waiting beside Mom." I did not know what to say. Her decision had still been wrong. But suddenly it was not cold. It had been made out of fear. Fear is capable of terrible manners. It enters other people's lives without knocking and rearranges furniture because it believes urgency gives it permission. I had done that to Elaine more times than I wanted to admit. During her final year, if she mentioned being tired, I cancelled plans. If she stood too quickly, I reached for her. If she said she wanted to cook, I said I would do it. One evening she slammed a wooden spoon onto the kitchen counter and said, "Samuel, I am still alive enough to ruin dinner." At the time, I thought she was being unreasonable. 6 years later, sitting at Beth's table, I finally understood the sentence. I had been afraid. So I helped too much. Beth had been afraid. So she decided too much. Different fear. Same arrogance. I said. You still had no right. Beth nodded. I know. You cannot make decisions for me just because you're afraid of having to make them later. I know. And I should not make you responsible for things I refuse to discuss. Beth looked at me. That would help. Molly, who had wisely remained silent for several minutes, said, "Are we having emotional growth?" I pointed at her. Do not ruin it. Richard laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. We did not solve the cemetery problem that night. But we solved something larger. We started talking about it. The following Sunday, I called Tom and told him to come home in November. He asked why. Family meeting. Am I in trouble? Probably. Tom flew in 2 weeks later. We gathered around my dining room table. Me, Beth and Richard. Tom. Molly. I placed a yellow legal pad in front of me. Tom looked at it. What is this? Your mother's system. She would have used a binder. She is not here to overachieve. I had made a list. Not of what Beth should do. Of what I wanted. Who should make medical decisions if I could not? Who should handle finances? Where important documents were kept? What should happen to the house? Which furniture mattered and which furniture I had only kept because getting rid of furniture requires effort. I wrote down what kind of service I wanted. Nothing complicated. No long speeches. No one describing me as a man who never complained, because it would insult both memory and evidence. Molly laughed. Then I reached the cemetery. The room became quiet. I had written. Not decided. Beth looked surprised. I thought you wanted Cedar Grove. I did. You still can. Not in 215. There are other plots. I know. Tom leaned back. You're not going to challenge the transfer? I had spoken to an attorney. Not to sue Beth. I wanted to understand my options. He told me there were arguments that could be made about whether the transfer fit the responsibility Beth had been given. It could become complicated. Expensive. Slow. And if I succeeded? Marjorie Sloan would lose the place beside Frank. I had spent weeks furious that someone else had made that choice for me. I was not going to prove my independence by taking the same choice from another widow. Beth started crying again. She had cried more that month than I had seen in 6 years. I found it inconvenient. What? Nothing. You are crying. I know. Then it isn't nothing. She smiled through it. Listen to you. She was right. 2 months earlier, I would have called the tears nothing because I did not know what to do with them. Elaine used to say I treated emotion like a leaking faucet. Identify source. Stop flow. Return tools to garage. Apparently I was improving. The family meeting lasted 3 hours. Then something unexpected happened. I asked Tom what he wanted. He looked confused. For what? For yourself. Tom laughed. Dad, I'm 51. Apparently that's old enough for everyone to have opinions about me but too young for you to have a plan? He stopped laughing. Tom had no will. Beth stared at him. You don't have a will? No. You own a house. I know. You have 2 children. I know. What is wrong with you? Tom looked at me. See what you've started? For the first time, the meeting became funny. Beth discovered Richard had not updated a beneficiary form in 14 years. Molly admitted she had never told anyone where she kept copies of her important documents. I discovered my entire family had been avoiding different versions of the conversation they were frustrated with me for avoiding. That is family. We are often most irritated by weaknesses we recognize poorly in ourselves. In December, Cedar Grove called. Ms. Patel had something to show me. I drove out the next morning. She walked me to Section C. There was a plot available. Not beside the lane. Across the narrow walkway. About 18 feet away. Plot 231. It sat beneath one of the maple trees Elaine had liked when we first visited Cedar Grove. From 231, you could see her stone directly. Ms. Patel said. It isn't what you had. No. But I remembered you saying your wife liked the trees. I looked up. Branches bare for winter. I could hear Elaine complaining already. Too many leaves. Too much shade. Why did Samuel pay extra for this? Even though she had been the one who chose the trees. I asked Ms. Patel to hold 231 for 1 week. Then I did something that surprised her. I called Beth. Can you come to Cedar Grove Saturday? Is something wrong? No. I want your opinion. Silence. Then. Are you feeling okay? I changed my mind. Stay home. She laughed. Saturday morning, Beth met me beneath the maples. It was cold enough that our breath showed. Elaine's chrysanthemums had finally given up. I showed Beth 231. She looked at it. Then Elaine's stone. Then back at me. What do you think? Beth did something very important. She did not answer. Instead she said, "What do you think?" I smiled. Better. What? You're getting better at this. She understood. So are you. We stood in plot 231. I looked across at Elaine. 18 feet. After 52 years of marriage, I had occasionally wished for 18 feet. Beth laughed when I said that. Mom would say the same thing. I know. And there it was. What I had actually been afraid of losing. Not proximity. Knowing. Being the person who knew what Elaine would say. Being the last person who remembered certain stories. Being able to look at something ridiculous and know exactly which expression would appear on her face. Plot 215 had never held that. I did. Beth did. Tom did. Molly carried pieces of it without even realizing. A promise made after 52 years was not a coordinate on a cemetery map. I bought plot 231. With my money. After making my own decision. Beth did not fill out the form. I did. It took me 12 minutes and I complained about the small print for 9 of them. Beth sat beside me and said nothing. I appreciated that. Before leaving Cedar Grove, I walked over to Frank Sloan's grave. Marjorie's temporary marker remained in 215. I looked at it differently now. It was not somebody else's name in my place. It was Marjorie's name beside Frank. There is a difference. In January, I received a card from Marjorie. She had heard from Ms. Patel that I purchased another plot. The card contained only 3 sentences. She thanked me for understanding. She said she hoped plot 231 had good shade. Then she wrote, "Frank hated raking leaves, so I think I got the better location." I laughed for several minutes. Then I called her. We became acquaintances. Not close friends. I am not going to pretend life tied everything in a ribbon. But sometimes when our cemetery visits overlap, we drink coffee on the bench near Section C. We complain about grounds maintenance. Weather. Our children. Mostly our children. Beth and I changed too. The power of attorney stayed revoked for 3 months. Then I created a new one. Beth is still my first choice. That surprised her. After everything? After everything. Are you sure? No. Dad? Yes, I'm sure. But this time we discussed it. Not just what she was legally allowed to do. What I wanted her to do. And, just as importantly, what I did not want. We wrote down that decision should include me for as long as I could participate. We talked about the house, bank accounts, healthcare, the ridiculous grandfather clock Elaine bought in 1992 that none of the children want. I told Molly it was hers. Molly said she had done nothing to deserve that. I said exactly. Tom made his own will. Beth witnessed it with the satisfaction of a woman who had recently discovered a new reason to judge her younger brother. Richard updated his paperwork. Molly made an emergency folder. My cemetery problem somehow turned into an administrative crisis for the entire family. Elaine would have loved it. Spring came. The maple over plot 231 grew leaves. Beth and I visited Cedar Grove together one April morning. Not because I needed a ride. I drove. She came because I asked. We put fresh flowers beside the lane. Tulips. Elaine liked those. Beth sat on the bench. I remained standing near the stone. Then she said, "Can I tell you something without you getting angry?" That depends entirely on the thing. Good start. She looked toward plot 231. I like that one better. I stared at her. Dangerous opening, Beth. I don't mean because it's closer to me. I mean the tree. She looked up through the leaves. Mom would have picked the tree. I looked too. She probably would have. Then Beth said, "I'm still sorry." I know. I really thought I was helping. I know. That somehow makes me feel worse. I sat beside her. Your mother once threw out every shirt I owned with a chest pocket. Beth turned. What? She said they made me look like a retired geography teacher. You were a retired accountant. Exactly. Did you get angry? For 6 years. Beth laughed. What's your point? My point is loving someone does not prevent you from occasionally being spectacularly wrong about what is best for them. Beth nodded. Then she said, I still think the shirts were bad. You sound exactly like her. I meant it as a compliment. The biggest change happened the following summer. For years, I visited Cedar Grove on the first Saturday of every month. Never missed one. January snow. August heat. Rain. Wind. Then one Saturday morning Molly called. She had purchased an old house with her husband and was removing wallpaper from 3 bedrooms. She asked for help. I looked at the calendar. First Saturday. For perhaps 15 seconds I genuinely believed I had a scheduling conflict. Then I realized one of the appointments was with somebody who would not complain if I moved it. Elaine hated wallpaper. Especially floral wallpaper. Molly had purchased a house containing enough floral wallpaper to make Elaine question the entire real estate industry. So I went to Molly's. We spent 6 hours scraping walls. Richard came. Beth brought sandwiches. Tom called and offered advice from Colorado, which was precisely as useful as you would imagine. At 4 that afternoon, I realized something. I had not gone to Cedar Grove. Nothing terrible happened. I did not love Elaine less at 4 o'clock than I had at 8 that morning. I went Sunday instead. I sat on the bench and told her about Molly's wallpaper. Then I said, "You missed nothing." And for the first time since Elaine died, I understood that changing a ritual did not betray the person who created it with you. Sometimes it meant the ritual had done its job. I still visit. Usually once a month. Sometimes twice. Once I went 6 weeks. I did not report myself to anyone. Marjorie is still around. She turned 78. I brought her coffee on her birthday because I happened to see her at Cedar Grove. She informed me it was terrible. I informed her she was free to purchase her own. Frank remains in 216. Elaine remains in 214. Marjorie's marker remains in 215. And my name is recorded for 231. I no longer think of that arrangement as wrong. It is simply the way the map changed. Maps change. Families do too. That was the part I resisted. When Elaine was alive, our family had a shape. She remembered things. I repaired things. Beth organized things. Tom escaped things by living in Colorado. Everyone had a place. Then Elaine died. The shape changed. Beth moved into responsibilities her mother had carried. I held too tightly to decisions Elaine and I had made because those decisions felt like proof our marriage still had a present tense. Tom stayed far enough away that he could believe neutrality was the same as innocence. And none of us said what we were actually afraid of. Beth was afraid of becoming responsible for another parent without knowing what he wanted. Tom was afraid that distance would make him useless when the family needed him. I was afraid that every changed decision carried Elaine farther into the past. We were all trying to protect something. And for a while, we protected it badly. I am 80 now. Beth still has opinions. Many. Far more than one person requires. Last month she suggested I hire someone to clean the gutters. I reminded her I have owned a ladder since 1974. She said, "I know. You mention the ladder more often than some people mention their grandchildren." I considered this. Then I hired someone to clean the gutters. I did not tell Beth for 3 days. Growth should not become reckless. I manage most of my own bills. Beth helps with the complicated ones. The difference now is that she asks. And I answer. Sometimes the answer is no. She has learned no does not mean I reject her. Sometimes the answer is yes. I have learned yes does not mean I surrender myself. That took longer. Last week Beth and I went to Cedar Grove. The maple leaves had begun turning orange. She carried the flowers. I carried coffee. We stood beside Elaine for a while. Then Beth walked across the path to plot 231. She looked down at the grass. Still okay with this? Yes. Really? Yes. You're not saying yes because you think I want you to? I looked at her. Do you understand how annoying you've become? She smiled. I learned from professionals. We sat on the bench. After a few minutes Beth said, Mom would like this. The cemetery? No. This. She pointed between us. I looked at my daughter. 55 when she sold the plot. 56 now. Still my daughter. Also a woman who had lost her mother. That sounds obvious. It had taken me 6 years to fully see it. When Elaine died, I lost my wife. Beth lost her mother. Those griefs lived in the same family but were not the same grief. I had expected Beth to understand mine because Elaine was her mother. I had rarely asked whether I understood hers. So I asked, what do you miss most about her? Beth looked surprised. Then she smiled. The phone calls. Elaine called Beth almost every afternoon at 4. They talked for 10 minutes. Sometimes 40. I knew this. But I had never thought about what 4 o'clock became after Elaine died. Beth said, for months I still looked at the clock at 4 and thought my phone was about to ring. I understood immediately. For months after Elaine died, I still woke slightly when she would have turned over in bed. Different habit. Same absence. We sat beneath the maple tree for another 20 minutes. We talked about Elaine. Not the funeral. Not the cemetery. Elaine. How she kept peppermint candies in every purse she ever owned. How she refused to throw away gift bags. How she called the television remote the changer until the day she died. Beth remembered things I had forgotten. I remembered things she never knew. Together, for a little while, Elaine became larger than a headstone again. That is what I had wanted from plot 215. Continuity. I had simply been looking for it in the wrong place. One day, unless something very unusual happens to medical science, my children will have decisions to make about me. I know that. I do not enjoy knowing it. But pretending the decisions do not exist does not protect my independence. It only guarantees someone else will have to guess. And guessing is where fear becomes dangerous. Beth guessed. She guessed wrong. I blamed her for not knowing something I had never clearly told her. We both had something to apologize for. But there is another part I want to make clear. Understanding why someone crossed a boundary does not erase the boundary. Beth was afraid. She loved me. She believed she was making a practical decision. She still should have asked. Love is not permission. Age does not transfer ownership of your choices to your children. But independence is not permission to leave the people who love you completely uninformed either. There has to be something between control and silence. We found it eventually. Conversation. Not very exciting. No dramatic music. No courtroom. No winner. Just people asking, "What do you want?" And then doing the much harder thing. Listening to the answer. As Beth and I left Cedar Grove last week, we passed plot 215. Marjorie's marker was there. Frank's stone beside it. Elaine on the other side. Beth stopped. "Do you ever wish you'd fought for it?" I thought about the question. Then I said, "Sometimes." That surprised her. "You do?" "Yes." "Doesn't that bother you?" "No." "Why?" "Because peace is not the same as never wishing something happened differently. Sometimes peace is knowing you would choose the same thing even though part of you still misses what you lost." I miss plot 215. Not the dirt. The certainty. But certainty is not a person. Elaine was. And Elaine's life with me happened in kitchens and cars and grocery stores and hotel rooms that smelled like paint. It happened while raising 2 children. Paying mortgages. Burning dinners. Arguing about thermostats. Finding sunglasses that were already on her head. 52 years cannot be reduced to 18 feet of cemetery grass. I wish I had understood that before I nearly turned my daughter into an enemy over it. I also wish Beth had understood that before she signed her name. We both know better now. Tomorrow is the first Saturday of the month. Ordinarily, I would go to Cedar Grove in the morning. But Molly called yesterday. She and her husband are painting the room that used to contain the floral wallpaper. She asked whether I would help. I said yes. Beth is bringing lunch. Richard is bringing paint rollers. Tom will probably call from Colorado and tell us we are holding the brushes incorrectly. Elaine would have complained about the color Molly chose. I already know exactly what she would say. So Cedar Grove can wait until Sunday. Elaine will still be in plot 214. Marjorie will still have 215. Frank will still be in 216. And someday, plot 231 will be mine. But not tomorrow. Tomorrow, I have somewhere else to be. And after everything that happened, I think Elaine would consider that the better arrangement.